Welcome to the Craig Brock Real Estate Show, helping you navigate through all the challenges and pitfalls related to real estate. Craig is San Diego's real estate investment strategist. And now, here's Craig Brock.
And good morning, Southern California. 10-year Treasury still looking beautiful, about 2.5%. But we've been talking about opportunities to get into a home where you don't need a big bank. And that's really why we look at the 10-year Treasuries, because it's a good barometer for mortgage rates. And we've had a really nice pullback in the last recent month to the low of 2014. But not everybody's cheering, because a lot of people still want to get into a home and they find it a challenge. There was some information out of the FHA yesterday about making it easier for people with derogatory credit to get back into the market. But let's face it, they're not doing much to help. That's why you need someone on your side that can show you a different way. That's why we've been discussing opportunities that are available with Terry Lewis. He's the expert at sellerfinanceconsultants.com, and Terry can show you an easier way if you've had a previous short sale or bankruptcy or repossession, or who knows what the case was. Maybe you just had a lot of derogatory credit and you've been turned down for a mortgage by the big box bank. Terry can help. He has a different strategy. And if you have one of these underwater homes and your mortgage servicer hasn't been kind enough to reach out to you and redo your mortgage, he has a solution for you that can help you get out of that underwater property with ease. So you can effectively take that property out of your debt to income. Good morning, Terry. Thanks for joining us here on Financial News and Talk.
Good morning, Craig. Thanks for having me again today.
Yeah, absolutely. I know we want to get into the investment side of what you do, but just to recap, why do listeners need to know about your strategy, and what makes your strategy so fantastic for people that have had derogatory credit?
Well, I think that seller financing is it's the new shift in real estate finance. Regular loans are very difficult to get. I think there was a statistic out that over the last 6 years, given the fact that the Dodd-Frank Act passed in January of this year, that only 15% of the people that got loans in the last 6 years would actually qualify today for one of those, as you say, big box home loans. So I think when it comes to seller financing, it's something that's kind of cutting edge in a way, or it's coming back from the 80s, and I think there just at least needs to be a conversation for buyers, for sellers, and for homeowners that are selling their home, and investors on at least a conversation on this strategy, on what can be done with it. Because it is something that I think is going to be becoming more and more prevalent in the future.
Well, I'm certainly with you there. If you're a veteran, you can take advantage of 100% financing. The VA loans are terrific. The interest rates are about 3.75% for a 30-year fixed-rate mortgage without having to pay any points whatsoever. Typically, when we write these loans here at Rancho Financial, we're even helping with some of the closing costs. There's just nothing better. But let's face it, not everyone has the VA eligibility, because you have to be a veteran or you have to be active duty military to be able to take advantage of this fantastic loan program that's available. Now, the FHA is what we are accustomed to talking about here quite a bit on this broadcast. The FHA still has fantastic rates, about 3.75, maybe 4% on a bad day for a 30-year fixed-rate mortgage without paying a bunch of points. But then you tack on the expensive mortgage insurance, the monthly mortgage insurance on top of the upfront premium that gets added to the loan. All of a sudden, you're talking about an APR, an annual percentage rate, that's quite a bit higher than 3.75%. It's closer to 6%, and it just causes some people to take a step back. Now, that's starting to get expensive. There's no plans for that to change by any means with the FHA, and it will probably get more expensive as time goes. And let's face it, if you earn over $100,000 a year as a household, you can't deduct the cost of mortgage insurance. But we do want to reach out to our tax expert this morning because, let's face it, I'm a banker. I'm not a tax expert, and there's a lot to know when it comes to tax planning. And that's why we want to bring in John Milikowski. He's the attorney here in San Diego that you've been accustomed to hearing that can help you if you owe the IRS or the Franchise Tax Board a bunch of money, but he can also help you with strategy. Good morning, Mr. Milikowski. Thanks for joining us here on this Bloomberg broadcast.
Good morning, Craig.
Yes, sir. I want to ask you about tax planning as it relates to these installment sales that we've been discussing with Terry Lewis. This is a great opportunity for someone to get into a home that has tarnished credit that's been turned down by the mortgage broker or the big box bank. This is a strategy where you sell your property, and in many cases, these properties that you sell or you unload them with an installment contract, and it could be labeled a lot of different things. It could be labeled an all-inclusive deed of trust. It could be a wraparound mortgage. There's other acronyms out there for what we're discussing here, but the bottom line is that there's an existing loan that's on the subject property that's going to remain. There's a servicer that's collecting the payment from the new buyer and paying the old bank. I want to get your thoughts on this tax planning. This is a lot better than renting, and it gives you the benefits of home ownership because you're able to deduct the mortgage interest if it's done correctly. Would you agree, sir?
I actually do agree that it could be a very good situation for a buyer who may not qualify with a traditional loan, and that the deduction should carry over to the buyer, the person who's actually occupying the residence. So if you have somebody who is living in the residence and paying the mortgage or the note to the seller, they should be able to deduct those payments, the interest payments at least.
Okay, now I should quantify one of the instruments there, which would be the 1099. Now the 1099 is what the bank actually gives to the homeowner or to the person of record that has the mortgage, correct? At the end of every year, that's that document that appears in the mailbox indicating how much mortgage interest was paid.
Yeah, that's correct. So the bank will actually have record of the actual person who's the borrower, according to the bank's record. That might be a different person than the person who's living in the home and making payments to the seller. And so we had a case a while back where a gentleman and actually a couple owned a home, lived in a home, and couldn't afford no longer to live in that home. So the father ended up buying the home from them. He refinanced or actually acquired a new loan, and his son and daughter or daughter-in-law were still living in the property. And the IRS did challenge that, indicating that they shouldn't be able to deduct the mortgage interest because they weren't the same taxpayer listed on the 1099. But we successfully challenged that, and although it's not publicly, in the publications of the IRS, the fact does remain that they were still the homeowners, they were still living in the property. Nothing had really changed other than who is the borrower on the bank's note.
Really comes down to custody, who has custody of the particular property. We're listening to John Milikowski with the law office of John D. Milikowski in San Diego, and Terry Lewis with sellerfinanceconsultants.com. Terry, I want to ask you, you set these contracts up with a servicer, so there's an independent servicer that you've mentioned that actually collects the mortgage payment from the new homeowner and pays the bank. I'm sure that part of the process involves this 1099 instrument. Do you have anything to add to that question?
Yeah, well, basically the servicer is a third neutral party, like an escrow, and they just take instructions from the buyer and the seller. The buyer pays the mortgage to the servicer, and then the servicer forwards a few checks, one to the bank, one to if there's any remainder, to the seller. John, as far as the tax deduction goes, you can't double dip, but there just is an agreement done ahead of time on who's taking the deduction. And I think in every case I've ever done, it's always the buyer that wants the deduction because they own the home, and that's the benefit of owning a home. So you can just, you have an agreement for that. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct, and that's true. You cannot double dip as long as there's only one deduction. But it does come down, again, to who's living in the home. And so if the buyer is not on the loan, the traditional loan with the bank, but the seller is obviously the one, and the seller's not living in the home, the buyer should be able to take that deduction. I mean, they're paying the utilities, they're living in the home, to paying the maintenance costs for the property, and acting like a normal owner of the property. So there shouldn't be an issue.
Okay. That's fantastic. Mr. Milikowski, for listeners that want to know more, or maybe have a scenario like this themselves and they have questions, how can listeners reach you, sir?
Yes, we have an office in San Diego. They could reach us at our toll-free number at 844-444-2889. You can also reach us locally at 858-450-1040 or through our website at caltaxadvisor.com. That's CalTaxAdvisor.com.
Well, that's fantastic. And I know I've got one more question for you here. One of the catalysts that's driving people to sell their property on these installment contracts is the number of divorces. I mean, let's face it, the economy is better than it has been, and a lot of people that have been pent up, so to speak, are going through divorce. There's some news that you have about underreporting of alimony income. Can you explain briefly the scenario there?
Yeah, that's an interesting news article that came out recently. So if you're divorced and paying alimony to your spouse, the person who's paying can get a deduction on their tax return, and it's an above-the-line deduction, which reduces their adjusted gross income and thereby reduces their taxes. However, the spouse who's receiving those funds has to record that as income, so somebody's going to be paying tax on it. Now, there's been a discrepancy of about $2.3 billion in deductions, where the spouse that's making the payment has taken the deduction, but the spouse who's receiving the payment either hasn't reported the income or has underreported income. And these situations can arise in different ways. There could be a discrepancy on whether the full payment was alimony or partly child support. So it's not all, intentional wrongdoing, but there has been a discrepancy, and the service is now catching on to that.
Well, that's fantastic. For listeners that have questions, again, your phone number, please, sir.
Sure, 858-450-1040, or toll free at 844-444-2889.
All things tax. And Terry, do you have any last questions?
I do have a question for John. So, John, when we put together a seller financing transaction, a lot of times what we're doing is consulting with the seller especially, and also the buyer, on exactly what their financial position is with regards to, interest rate, and, do they want to charge. I had an instance now where someone wanted a nominal rate and was paying a huge payment, but it was mostly principal. So in creating these transactions, I find it very helpful to have counsel or a CPA that would look at a seller's and a buyer's financial situation. And the good part about these seller financing transactions is you can create something that helps, that has a win-win for both parties. And is that something that you also do?
Yes, we do assist or counsel people who are involved in real estate transactions who want to make sure that if there's an audit involved, obviously it'll pass muster. So the question you raised is a good one regarding the interest rate. So if you have, for instance, related parties, a father and a son, and the father's going to loan the son money, but he wants to do the 1% interest rate, it might be deemed a gift. And the way it comes about is that the IRS publishes a federal rate, what the market rate should be. Let's say that's about 4%. If the father-son transaction is at 1%, the 3% under market rate might be treated as a gift. So it's not necessarily that it would be disallowed, but it might be treated as a gift. Now, the same might be true if you have unrelated parties. They might actually impute it as additional income. So you probably want to make sure that you follow as closely as possible with the federally published rate, which does fluctuate a little bit.
Okay. Very good.
Sage advice, if you're trying to get a lower rate, the scenarios there, you have to be careful because the government's going to potentially impute a rate. or especially if you get audited. That's what I'm understanding there. Am I correct with that ideology?
Yes, that's correct. They're going to look at the transaction and see whether there's a market rate that's between unrelated parties, and whether that transaction fell below the market or above.
Okay, well, sage advice. Thank you very much, Mr. Milikowski, for your contribution this morning.
Great. Thank you, Craig.
Absolutely. Boy, a lot to know there, Terry, when it comes to setting up these installment contracts. I know you have the experts that are on your staff. We heard from one earlier this week that prepares the documentation. When it comes to the tax planning expert, I certainly encourage listeners to reach out to John D. Milikowski. And if you owe the government, if you owe the IRS, or if you owe the state of California a bunch of money, well, be careful calling these people that are advertising on some of these radio stations and other TV stations, even the scenarios that there's a lot to know. They'll charge you a lot. John Milikowski will meet with you, offer you a free, no obligation consultation. He'll spend a lot of time with you on strategy. All you have to do is contact his office or check him out on the web. John D. Milikowski. Terry, we've got some news this morning. Existing home sales rebound, but we're also seeing the inventory increase, and we all know what that means. When the inventory increases, it's a nice opportunity if you're looking to buy a home, but for sellers, this makes your strategy even more imperative.
Yes. Really, what I see as the big picture is this Dodd-Frank Act that passed in January. Prior to January, there was all this talk about home housing is rebounding, and this year is going to be, really great, and prices are going to increase, and everything's going to be back to rosy picture again, and what I don't think people realize is the impact of this federal act on home loans. And so now you have buyers that don't qualify. Like I said earlier in the broadcast, that there's 15% of the buyers over the last 6 years that would have qualified for a home loan given today's requirements. And so this is impacting the demand, even though there is a demand for home ownership. It's the American dream, is to own a home. The fact is that now inventories are increasing because there's a problem. It's on a previous interview I had, I said that the real estate market has a cold, and the government has given everybody a malaria shot to try to fix it, which doesn't help. So.
Well, I think you're referring to the quantitative easing there we've had with the federal government, the asset purchases, and it has worked out well because it has allowed many people to refinance their mortgage. It brought mortgage rates down to a 100-year low. But let's face it, if you don't have the proper documentation, if you have had credit challenges, you don't qualify for a mortgage unless you go through credit restoration. And we have hundreds of people that are going through credit restoration right now. I'm putting out hundreds of dollars on the line every single day to help restore credit. Now, on some of these cases, Terry, it's just a matter of a few days to get credit supplements and to challenge trade lines that are derogatory on one's credit. I do that for I don't charge anything. I pay for that out of my hide. Some people have more elaborate problems, and that's when they need to go to one of our associates that can really rehab their credit. Now, rehab. We have customers that are in rehab for credit restoration. Now, that can be about a 6-month process. But let's face it, after 6 months, you're clean. You're able to get into a new home of your own. There's some news, though, about these financial companies and their IPOs, Ally Financial and Santander. Now, they're getting a boatload of money, Terry. But what are they doing? They're not putting it into real estate. They're not putting that money into mortgages. They're not helping people get into homes. And that's what you do. You're like a guy on an island that's directing the money into these different notes. Can you elaborate on the opportunity that exists for somebody that wants a high yield return that has money to invest? What are they investing in? Are they investing in a mortgage note?
Yeah, so the mortgage note is backed by the real estate. And it's something that an investor could actually buy this note. It's a cash flow. And it's like winning the lottery and you can get your lottery winnings over a period of 30 years, or you can get a lump sum, and the lump sum is a lower amount because you're paying taxes on it, and it's also the discounted cash flow of the winnings. So an investor can actually buy a note and say, they want a 10% return on their money, and the note is at 9%. Well, you can buy that note that gives yourself a 10% return by discounting the note, and basically the seller of the note would be getting a little bit less money, but they would get the cash today instead of over payments over a period of time. So it's a really neat strategy for IRAs and 401ks if you can self-direct them, and you can drive by a property and say, I own the note on that. I'm the bank on that property, and you know who the payer is, and it's a good piece of property, and if they don't pay, you can actually foreclose on it, which will hinder your cash flow a little bit, but you know that it's always secure.
It's secure. You have the collateral. You can seize the collateral should you need to do that. Now, I know that there was a lot of information there. There was discounting and everything of that nature. For listeners that want to know more about that, you'll help them with that. You'll create the entire matrix. You don't have to know anything about discounts and that mechanism. All they have to do is contact your office. We need to get your phone number out there, Terry.
Okay, great. So we're sellerfinanceconsultants.com. And our phone number is 619-786-5550, sellerfinanceconsultants.com. And we have a team we have Jim Eckley, who's our attorney, that makes sure that our agreements are compliant with the Dodd-Frank Act and meeting everybody's needs. We have CPAs that bless these transactions, and we have all the skills and all the people involved that make this a safe investment for everybody.
Well, that's fantastic. So for investors that want to diversify into real estate, this is a different way of being able to diversify into real estate. I know in tomorrow's program we'll have Roger Faulkner with RBD making an appearance. He does things differently. He actually buys foreclosed property and he rehabs that property and resells it. This is an opportunity to actually invest in a mortgage note if you want a higher return in your self-directed IRA. This is one way to do it. You can buy multiple notes. There's other strategies, and the other strategies, of course, are unloading your underwater real estate with this particular scenario. And if you've been turned down by the big bank, if you've been turned down for a mortgage, heck, even if you've been turned down from my office potentially, if we haven't been able to repair your credit because you just have too much going wrong, maybe this is just the strategy that you've been looking for. Now, you do have to have some down payment. Terry, again, how much typically are we looking at putting down to get into one of these seller-financed homes?
I would say a minimum of 10%. It's always up to the seller, but 10 to 20% down. But the thing is, the down payment can come from anywhere. There could be, whereas it can't come from anywhere with a bank. Gift funds, a lot of times now they don't accept those, and you would know more about the details of that. But there's a lot more flexibility when it comes to this strategy. So
flexibility. That's the key word there, Terry. Really appreciate that. Love the fact that you're flexible when it comes to helping people get into homes. It could be anywhere in the Southland. It could be Rancho Cucamonga, Rialto, Carlsbad, Encinitas, Del Mar, even Rancho Santa Fe. Anywhere. The number for sellerfinanceconsultants.com is 619-786-5550. And for all things mortgage, I'm Craig Brock Mortgage. I can put together a comprehensive report for you in just a matter of minutes. I can show you all the benefits of home ownership correlated with your tax savings. Well, Mr. Lewis, thank you very much for your contribution this morning on this Bloomberg Network. We appreciate you being with us, sir.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
You betcha. Well, have a fantastic day, Southern California, and tune in tomorrow to this same network, same time, same place. We're going to hear from Roger Faulkner at RBD Ventures. Have a fantastic day.